The broadcast flickered on, its cold blue light illuminating the darkened room. On the screen, a figure stood, bound and motionless, flanked by alien enforcers. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd that filled the Galactic Council's grand hall, their collective eyes fixed on the human who was about to meet his end. His name, echoed through the chamber, was Solomon Stroud, Earth's ambassador to the stars. "Humanity is unworthy of diplomacy," declared the Council's supreme leader, a towering figure with insectoid features. His voice, though distant, rang through the hall like an echo from a nightmare. "This is the price of defying the peace treaties." A tremor ran through Solomon's hand as he clenched it into a fist, the motion barely perceptible. His face, however, remained serene, detached even, as he locked eyes with the alien overlord, who watched with cold calculation. The holographic image blurred for a moment before it sharpened, signaling the commencement of the execution. "Stop!" A voice rang out, piercing the tension like a knife. The room stilled as all eyes shifted to the human figure standing before the supreme leader, unyielding and composed. Baba Yaga, the legend from Earth, had arrived. "I am not here for this," Baba Yaga's voice boomed, both commanding and sorrowful. He wasn't merely an ambassador, he was something far more, a being whose powers transcended mere diplomacy. His presence commanded silence in the chamber, as though the very air knew to hold its breath. The council's gaze fell on him, curiosity tempered with disdain. Baba Yaga was an anomaly, a human, yes, but a being who carried the weight of myth and forgotten history, whose powers could rival those of the galaxy's most feared beings. His eyes, pitch black with ancient knowledge, studied them without blinking, the sheer weight of his gaze causing the supreme leader to falter for a brief moment. "You think you can stop this?" the supreme leader sneered. "Your kind has been nothing but a thorn in the council's side, a primitive, backward species fighting against the inevitable." His antennae twitched with arrogance. "You dare interfere with the judgment of the council?" Baba Yaga didn't flinch. "This is not justice," he replied, his voice low and deliberate. "This is murder disguised as order." The hall erupted in a flurry of whispers. A human, with the audacity to call out the council's authority? He might as well have struck the very stars themselves. The tension simmered, but Baba Yaga's quiet confidence had planted a seed of doubt in their minds. Solomon, still bound and silent, caught Baba Yaga's gaze. His heart, though heavy with the despair of his predicament, flared with a flicker of hope. The diplomat's plight was not to be resolved with mere words, not today. But Baba Yaga, the ancient force of human nature itself, was something else entirely. "I have seen your future," Baba Yaga said, his voice now an edge of steel. "This execution, it is only the beginning of your fatal mistake." The supreme leader sneered, unimpressed. "Do not forget your place, Earthborn. You are nothing more than a failed relic of an era that should have been forgotten." Baba Yaga took a step forward, his shadow lengthening as though the very floor bent to his will. "You miscalculate, as you always do. You underestimate humans." His words reverberated through the chamber, a promise, a warning, and a challenge all in one. "And you will pay the price." A ripple of unease spread through the council. Their grip on their power had always been unchallenged, but now, the impossible had arrived at their doorstep. The humans were not as docile as they had believed. And Baba Yaga, in his quiet resolve, was the embodiment of their greatest fear. The supreme leader, narrowing his compound eyes, bared his fangs. "You dare threaten us?" "I do not threaten," Baba Yaga replied, the faintest trace of a smile playing on his lips. "I offer a choice." The room stilled again, an eerie calm descending as tension coiled tighter. The words were clear: either the council would acknowledge humanity's power, or they would face an inevitable war. A war that could not be won. "Choose," Baba Yaga said softly. "Live in peace or face extinction." And with that, the moment hung suspended in the air, the weight of it pressing down on every living being in the room, as the first true war for humanity's future loomed large. Baba Yaga stood tall in the midst of the Galactic Council's council chamber, his dark eyes like the void between stars. The words hung in the air, thick with the gravity of their meaning. "Live in peace or face extinction." The supreme leader of the Galactic Council glared down at him, an aura of disdain radiating from his towering form. The room was silent, but beneath that silence pulsed a nervous energy, like the stillness before a storm. "You underestimate us, human," the supreme leader finally growled, his voice like a crack of thunder in the quiet. Baba Yaga's lips curled into a slight smile, but his eyes were unwavering, cold, and resolute. "No, I understand you perfectly." His voice was quiet but filled the room. "I understand your arrogance, your fear, and your inevitable downfall." A flicker of unease passed across the faces of the other council members, though most kept their expressions masked. The council, a collective of alien races, had never faced an adversary like this, an individual who defied both their will and their understanding of power. A human, standing alone, unflinching in the face of them all. "You have no right," the supreme leader hissed. "We are the rulers of this galaxy, and you are a mere relic of a dying species." Baba Yaga's eyes darkened. "Perhaps. But I've seen the future you're creating. It's one of blood, destruction, and regret. And for you, there will be no peace." Solomon Stroud, the human diplomat who had stood silently until now, glanced at Baba Yaga, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The ancient force beside him, who was at once a protector and an avenger, had made his declaration, but the ramifications were not yet clear. Would the Galactic Council give in to diplomacy, or would this escalate into something far more dangerous? "I know the Council's motivations," Baba Yaga continued, turning his gaze to the Council members. "You act as though humans are insignificant, like ants beneath your boots. But you forget one simple fact." He paused for effect, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Humans don't break. We bend, we struggle, we endure. And when we do fight, we fight to win." The supreme leader's eyes narrowed, his forelimbs twitching in agitation. "You think your pitiful resistance will stop us?" His voice was barely above a whisper, though the threat behind it was unmistakable. "You're nothing. Nothing but a fleeting annoyance in the grand design." Baba Yaga's lips twisted into a grim expression. "And therein lies your mistake. You've forgotten the true power of humanity. You've never seen us at our best, only at our worst." He stepped forward, his every movement deliberate, drawing the eyes of the entire chamber. "But I'm not here to fight. Not yet." The tension in the room was palpable. All eyes turned to Solomon, whose heart beat wildly. He had never imagined a situation like this, his life, his mission, all of Earth's future, now teetering on a precipice. His gaze flicked back to Baba Yaga, who stood as an unwavering bastion of strength. Solomon had always respected the diplomat's otherworldly abilities, but now, faced with the reality of the situation, he saw the depth of his power. The weight of responsibility was crushing. "Baba Yaga, you've made your choice," Solomon said, his voice firm despite the turmoil inside him. "But what happens now?" The ancient figure turned slowly to face him, and for a moment, the weight of their shared history hung between them. Baba Yaga was not just a diplomat, he was humanity's final line of defense, an enigma with a deeper purpose than any mere negotiation. Solomon had seen glimpses of what the human diplomat could do, but today, he was seeing something far more profound. Baba Yaga was more than a negotiator. He was a harbinger. "We wait," Baba Yaga said simply. "We wait for them to understand. They will not relent easily, but they will not be able to ignore us." The words hung heavy in the air. "They will test us," Baba Yaga continued. "They will push us to the edge. But when they do, we'll show them why they should have never underestimated humanity." Solomon looked at him, his mind racing. "And if they don't listen?" he asked, a quiver of doubt in his voice. Baba Yaga's gaze hardened. "Then we will make them listen." The supreme leader's voice cracked through the tension like the snap of a whip. "Enough. You've made your threats. But understand this, human. The galaxy is vast, and you are nothing in its expanse. Do not test us." Baba Yaga stepped closer, his shadow lengthening, cloaking the room in an aura of power. I have no intention of testing you, he said softly, his words laced with finality. But you've already tested us. As Baba Yaga turned, the chamber erupted into chaos. Alien voices rose in protest, but the human diplomat stood firm, unyielding. His gaze swept across the room, calculating, watching, waiting for their next move. He knew, deep down, that the war they had all feared was no longer a matter of if, but when. The council chamber had fallen into uneasy silence since Baba Yaga's declaration. Solomon Stroud, still bound in the center of the hall, struggled to swallow his panic. His every breath felt heavy, burdened by the weight of his own uncertainty. The council's reaction had been swift, a mix of whispered debates and cold stares, but there was something more, a foreboding anticipation. The air around him felt charged, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Baba Yaga, however, was unfazed. His black eyes, as endless as the space between stars, swept over the room with quiet authority. The supreme leader had retreated to a raised platform, muttering with his advisors, but the words they spoke were of no consequence. Baba Yaga's presence alone commanded the room. We will not be dictated to by the whims of a single species, the supreme leader barked, his voice sharp as a whip. Prepare the fleets. Baba Yaga's lips tightened, his gaze sharpening. You misunderstand, he said, his voice low but resonant, like a storm gathering in the distance. I'm not here to negotiate your terms. I'm here to stop the war you've already started. The supreme leader recoiled slightly, an involuntary shift, but his pride quickly recovered. Your threats are meaningless. We are the council. We hold the power of 1,000 worlds. You have nothing. You are no match for us. I've heard that before, Baba Yaga replied softly, his words chilling the air. He stepped forward, his presence filling the room. And every time, you were wrong. The tension escalated, crackling between them. Solomon could feel his heart thundering in his chest as he watched the two figures, both representing the extremes of power, one bound by pride and the other by survival. In this moment, he realized something that had eluded him before. This wasn't just a political game. This was a fight for the very soul of humanity. Do you truly believe, Baba Yaga continued, his voice now cutting through the tension like a blade, that your fleets, your weapons, your supposed invincibility, will stop us? You mistake force for strength. You mistake fear for power. The supreme leader scoffed, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Your bravado is foolishness. We've crushed worlds for far less. Baba Yaga met his gaze without flinching. And yet, you never learn. You always underestimate humanity. Even now. The supreme leader's eyes narrowed. Enough. Your human arrogance ends here. If you do not submit to our authority, your species will be eradicated. The words cut through Solomon like a physical blow, but Baba Yaga didn't flinch. He stood tall, eyes unyielding. If you choose war, we will give it to you. But understand this, humans do not break easily. We fight with everything we have, and when we win, we do not forget. Solomon felt a flicker of hope. The confidence in Baba Yaga's voice was infectious, and yet, doubt gnawed at him. What if this was a step too far? What if humanity couldn't stand up to the council's might? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. You'll regret this, the supreme leader spat. Prepare yourselves for the consequences. Before he could issue another command, the chamber's lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like the fingers of some unseen hand. A low hum echoed from the walls, vibrating in the very bones of those present. Baba Yaga stood motionless, eyes closed, but his senses were fully attuned to the change. A ripple in the air. A shift in the galactic currents. Then, the silence shattered. Explosions rocked the distant reaches of the galaxy, their light flashing across the council's screens. A fleet of unknown origin, unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever seen, appeared in the holographic display. Massive ships, bristling with energy and weapons, surged through the stars, moving with terrifying precision. They're here, Baba Yaga muttered under his breath, his gaze never leaving the screens. And they've come for you. The Supreme Leader stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief as the alien ships appeared on every screen in the room. Each one bore the unmistakable insignia of humanity. Baba Yaga's voice was steady. "You thought we were weak. But we have allies. And those allies understand what you never will. When you push humans too far, you don't just fight against a species, you fight against a force of nature. One that will tear you apart if it has to." Solomon felt a surge of pride, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that a new battle had begun. The Galactic Council had made their choice. Now, the true cost of that choice would begin to unfold. "Your fate has already been sealed," Baba Yaga said, turning to Solomon. His eyes locked with the human diplomats. "Are you ready?" Solomon's heart pounded. His world had irrevocably changed, and he could no longer pretend that this was just another diplomatic mission. This was no longer about treaties and negotiations, it was about survival. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Ready." The fleet was coming. And the war they had all feared was no longer a matter of if, but when. The war was upon them. The fleet, once an abstract threat on screens, now hung in the vastness of space like an approaching storm. On the Council's bridge, the tension was palpable. The windows offered no comfort, they merely framed the chaos outside. The fleet of human allies surged toward the heart of the Galactic Council, and there was no turning back. Baba Yaga stood at the head of the room, his figure cast in the dim light from the glowing screens. Solomon Stroud stood beside him, the weight of their choices heavier than ever. The human diplomat's hands trembled at his sides, the shock still lingering in his chest from the earlier explosions that had rattled the foundations of the galaxy. "How did this happen?" Solomon whispered, his voice hoarse. Baba Yaga's answer was simple. "You called for war." And humanity answered. Solomon glanced at the displays again. The ships, sleek, deadly, and unmistakably human, lined up with precision. They moved as one, a calculated and unified force. The crew at the Council's helm appeared panicked, but it was too late to reverse their path. The moment of decision had passed. The fleet was already en route. "We have no more time for diplomacy," Baba Yaga said, his tone grim. "You chose to disregard the power of humanity, Solomon. Now, we must finish what was started." "But this wasn't the plan," Solomon replied. His voice quivered. "We were supposed to bring peace, not destroy everything." Baba Yaga's eyes flicked over to the diplomat, as though considering the depth of his confusion. "Peace," he repeated, his voice cold and distant. "The Council never wanted peace. They wanted compliance. They wanted subjugation. And they didn't care who they crushed to get it." Solomon opened his mouth to argue, but the words died on his lips as a new message flashed across the screen. A direct transmission from the Supreme Leader of the Galactic Council. His face, twisted in fury, filled the display. "You dare defy us?" The Supreme Leader's voice crackled through the comms. "This is your last warning, human. Stand down, or face the consequences." Baba Yaga smiled, a sharp, knowing smile that sent a chill through Solomon's spine. "We've heard this before, haven't we? You can't just keep throwing threats at us, not after everything we've seen. The fleet, our allies, will fight for us," Solomon said, a fire igniting in his chest. He turned to Baba Yaga, his resolve hardening. "We will fight back." Baba Yaga nodded, his gaze unwavering. "That's the spirit of humanity. But don't mistake this for mere resistance. This is the reckoning. For all the pain they've caused." Another flicker on the screen, and suddenly, the hum of the distant battle could be heard in the background. The human fleet had engaged the Council's forces. The first volley of fire lit up the stars as ships exploded in brilliant flashes, creating a breathtaking, deadly spectacle. Baba Yaga's expression remained unchanged. "They will feel it now. The consequences of their arrogance." The battle was not just a conflict between fleets, it was the culmination of centuries of tension, of every broken promise, every slight, every act of tyranny that the Galactic Council had forced upon the galaxy. Humanity had been its victim, until now. Are we prepared for this? Solomon asked, his voice edged with a new sense of determination. Prepared? Baba Yaga echoed, his tone almost amused. We've been preparing for centuries. It's just a matter of the right moment. The sound of explosions intensified as the battle raged on. The Council's ships, despite their technological advantage, were struggling against the sheer ferocity of the human assault. Each ship in the human fleet moved with precision and purpose, coordinated as if they had anticipated this very conflict for eons. Solomon's heart raced as the magnitude of the situation settled over him. The galaxy would never be the same. But as the battle continued, something shifted in his chest, a sense of pride, a feeling that humanity, against all odds, was fighting for something greater than themselves. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Baba Yaga asked, his voice cutting through the chaos like a calm amid the storm. Humanity. Standing against all odds. Refusing to kneel. Solomon nodded, his mind focusing, his resolve hardening. Yes. This is who we are. This is who we've always been. Baba Yaga's expression softened for a fraction of a second, but only long enough to reveal a hint of approval. Good. Then let's see it through. Outside, the distant flash of explosions illuminated the blackness of space. The human fleet, unyielding, continued its assault, a beacon of defiance against the oppressive forces of the Council. With every second, they moved closer to victory. And within the Council's walls, the realization began to settle: humanity was no longer a victim. They were a force to be reckoned with. A force that could not, and would not, be ignored. The Supreme Leader's last message cut through the static, his voice trembling with rage. You will regret this. Baba Yaga's smile returned. I doubt it. The final battle was upon them. And for the first time in a millennium, the Council realized they had underestimated the human spirit.